Hello, my fellow citizens. Maybe from the title and the thumbnail of this video, you might have guessed I recreated
Charnon.
one of the available weapons for Scythe from the video game Clair Obscur Expedition 33. Excellent game, by the way. Highly recommend. However, you may not know from these photos and videos that creating this scythe was actually a long journey in itself, and it's much more complicated than it looked. This is because I don't live in Boston. These photos and videos were taken at PAX East, which is a video game convention in Boston. I live in San Francisco, which is 2,700 miles away from Boston. So Charnon had to be able to fit in a checked suitcase, get past security, and fly on a plane. It all started when my friend showed me a trailer about this cool new game called Clair Obscur Expedition 33. I was immediately hooked and just bought the game. Out of all the characters in the game, I really like Sciel and Lune. However, I really like Sciel's outfit a lot more than Lune's. And I was like, what if I cosplay her? And I bought a cosplay for her. Why simp for a hot woman with Scythe when you can become hot woman with Scythe? Except Asian version, because I don't want to wear a wig. Now, the only thing missing was the big scythe. I also really like Sciel's weapons in general. What's not to like about a massive double-sided scythe? One of my friends was moving away at the time and gave me all her leftover craft materials, which included EVA foam. I knew that this is a material that's used a lot in cosplays, and I've always wanted to make a cosplay weapon, so I figured this is my time. So okay, I had a couple phases of brainstorming to figure out how I could get this massive scythe in a checked luggage. I knew for sure I had to design it in parts that could be assembled, but also disassembled and also fit on a 3D printer bed. I looked at all the available weapons in-game for Sciel. I picked Charnon because I thought it would be the easiest to model due to its geometric features. Spoiler alert, I had to remake the scythe once. The second edition is the final product, but we must tell you the story of the first edition in order to get to the second edition. So the plan was create the main base of the scythe using 3D printed PLA, and then the blades of the scythe using EVA foam. And since the base was symmetrical, it was much easier to make just half the base and just mirror it in Fusion. To note, I didn't do any cosplay research when I started this project, so please don't judge me. I'm just here sharing my silly little story, and hopefully you have fun along the way too. And I'm telling you also that people don't really do 3D printed screw inserts in the cosplay community, for good reason. It doesn't really work. People usually do some kind of pole insert with PVC or something like that. But more on that later. To maximize the quality and size of the scythe, I split out the model into parts where it would be easiest to hide the lines between the parts and scaled it so that the longest part could print in one piece on my printer bed. Charnon ended up being a bit larger than Canon because I wanted to make the scythe as large as possible given all the parameters so that I could feel the power of having a massive scythe. I did several test prints to test the 3D printed screws and tolerance for them to screw into each other. Some things I found out is that the tolerance can depend on the filament itself. There had to be enough tolerance for the screws to properly insert, but not too much tolerance that there is no friction for it to hold. Sometimes the friction was so strong that actually the 3D printed part would break. This is kind of the reason why you shouldn't be using 3D printed screws. They aren't very durable. Something else that affected how well the fitting would be for the 3D printed screws were if the screws were printed upwards or downwards. Similarly with the inserts. I did tests at different stages to check if parts felt sturdy enough. I had to reprint the main handle from 10% infill to 25% infill, which improved the strength and ability significantly. The huge diamond parts at the end were printed at 5% infill with less wall loops to reduce the weight at the ends as much as possible. While observing the pictures of Charnon in-game, there is actually one problem. Charnon himself is unrealistic. Well, I mean, it is a game weapon, and I doubt the game creators were thinking about realism and physics while they're developing the game. If you look at the section where the blade meets the base, there isn't a lot of area that the blade is actually connected to. Originally, I thought maybe I could use some strong magnets to make the blades detachable. However, I didn't think I could hold the weight of the first edition of the blades that I made. So I got rid of the part of the design where it was supposed to hold magnets. Instead, to help with the stability of the blade, I deviated a bit from Canon and shifted the blade closer to the base so that the blade could grip the base more tightly and therefore increase its stability. The blade would be hot glued to the upper section of the base pole. I tested that it would still fit even after the gluing, and it was fine as long as it was put at an angle. Through this, I was trying my best to balance the practicality, the closeness to Canon, the quality of the print cuts, the size, and the weight distribution. For the blade, I used EVA foam. To make sure I had the right shape and scale, I printed the blade out on paper so that it would be life-size scaled relevant to the diamond part that I had already 3D printed out. I used a box cutter to cut the shape of the foam and a heat gun to straighten the foam. Then hot glued the layers of EVA foam together. I used a bevel to smooth the edges out. and a heat gun at the end to get the dust out of the way. Since I don't have a garage anymore, my setup was kind of cursed. Everything was done on the fire escape of my building, and I used a vacuum to kind of clean up the bits around me. I layered 8mm EVA foam 4 times to get my desired thickness, so yeah, the first edition of Charnon was quite thick, but ultimately this led to the demise of the first edition of Charnon. She was too thick. I applied primer and matte black spray paint, and then sprayed a clear coat to seal the deal. When I put everything in the first edition together, I wasn't confident it would hold. I pondered a few days about what to do. I started thinking that instead of using 3D printed screws, maybe I should use metal screws and metal inserts. And during one of my test sessions, I accidentally stepped on it, breaking one of the 3D printed inserts, and I figured, you know what? This is a sign. I should redo this. 3D printed screws are not the way. Thick sides are not saving lives today. Okay, so I had to make Charnon less thick. I settled on making Charnon about 50% less thick. I reprinted the diamond top parts so that they would be about 50% less width. The blades also became 50% less thick. It went from 32mm to 15mm. I noticed that the glued together EVA foam didn't look that good, so instead I should just make the entire blade out of one piece of EVA foam. I ordered 15mm EVA foam to accomplish this. I ordered 3/8-inch screws and inserts since I wanted the base to be about 0.77 inches, which I felt like based on the results of my previous edition should have enough surrounding volume to support the weight but also the metal inserts. However, with the metal inserts, this led to a new issue. How could I ensure that the parts of the model would align now? And how can I make sure the metal screw part would stay in place? Trying to model the exact alignment is very difficult. So the solution I came up with that could make sure it would align but be flexible enough based on the construction was to create a hexagon the size of the top of the screw and then hot glue the area surrounding the screw to hold it in place. I could solve the alignment issue by gluing the screw first and then turning the insert enough so that if it were glued in, it should align if everything was unscrewed. And for the metal insert, I would just hot glue the insert in place. While things were working much better than version 1, and it seemed like it was going well. I began the paint stage with the primer, black paint spray layers, and then the clear coat. I wasn't sure if acrylic would show well on black spray paint, but I already had a perfect test subject, which was the first edition of Charnon, and I tested it. It looked great, so I continued painting the entire side, which was extremely fun for me. I used a fan brush to get some marks and texture to make it look like the sides had metal wear and tear on it, just like it looks like in the game. So version 2 of Charnon was a lot stronger, but the weakest point now moved from this point of the 3D printed insert to where the hot glue connected to the PLA. As I started to put the parts together, after tightening the screw to a certain point, it was highly likely for it to undo the hot glue and pull the insert out. I figured hot glue probably doesn't create a strong enough bond with PLA to really hold, or maybe I need to heat it more or something. But there's definitely something to do with the different temperatures of the two and something with the material structure. Things were mostly working, but this issue just became more and more apparent. I asked my friend who has made lots of cosplay for advice, and she immediately said, "Wait, why are you using metal screw inserts?" She showed me this video of this popular cosplay YouTuber showing how you can use a pole insert to connect or extend cosplay props. It definitely would have solved a lot of problems I kept having. I modified the design in Fusion so I could take out the screws and use poles instead, but I didn't actually go through with this idea because I didn't want to remake the side again after painting everything. I also would have had to had reprinted stuff too. But somehow I was able to get the screw inserts to work really well on one side, but not the other side. The other side I had attempted to put these screw inserts in like 15 times and it wouldn't stay. I just gave up on that side and accepted my fate. So what happened to that other side is I kind of made it into a pole insert because the screw insert was so tightly bound onto the screw and the hot glue around the screw insert had enough friction that it would stay inside the area that it was supposed to be in, that it worked well enough. And it wouldn't come apart and it was pretty sturdy for what it was worth. When I was at PAX, that hot glue friction did rub down over time. So at the end of the day, you can kind of see Charnon being a little crooked. But I hope no one noticed. And just to add a little icing on top, I recreated Sciel's cards. It's just painted acrylics on cardboard. I thought it would also be really fun to make a mini version of Charnon. So I scaled down the original model by 10 and used some of the leftover EVA foam to make the mini blades. I did the same process to it, hot glued the blades to the base, spray painted it black, and then added details with gold acrylic paint. and we ended up with a big Charnon and a baby Charnon. And both Charnons traveled 2,700 miles to Boston. Lots of people complimented the Scythe when I was walking around with it at PAX, and I was very proud of her. Thanks for listening. And for those who come after, I hope you learned something too.